Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, we're going to take a look at my team selection ahead of Game Week 3, including a transfer I have already made and all of the key issues facing all of our teams ahead of the deadline. In the meantime, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. For now though, let's crack on with it. So I wanted to start off today by saying a warm welcome to all of my new subscribers and a big thank you to Ross, otherwise known as FPL Raptor, who hosted me on the FPL Therapy show earlier this week. A couple of screenshots up on the screen now, and if you want to go and watch the full episode, about 100 minutes of FPL content there, I've left a link in the description below. In the meantime though, thank you so much. If you are new to the channel, hopefully you enjoy it. And before I lock off my mini league, a final or near final opportunity to get involved above. The code is RQ7NIR if you want to get involved in that. And of course, a quick reminder that all data that I talk about today is provided by Fantasy Football Hub. If you wanted to get involved with that, there is a link in the description for that as well. In the meantime, though, let's have a look at my team for Game Week 2. 85 points, a good performance overall. I wasn't really ever tempted to use the triple captain, especially as I got closer to the deadline. I did feel that there might be better opportunities later down the line, and I wasn't completely confident that Ipswich would be the whipping boys to target this year. Obviously, as it transpired, a hat-trick could have been even more, and he played absolutely phenomenally. And anyone who triple captained is absolutely laughing right now. So if you're one of those who hit the button, let me know in the comments. Huge congratulations to you, because that is massive. 17 points extra on a triple captaincy is fantastic, even if it was a double game week. So props to you, and hopefully I can get close to that later on in the season. Otherwise though, my team did look pretty good for Game Week 2. So in the back line and in defence, I still haven't had a blank in either my keepers or my defenders after 2 game weeks, which is actually pretty impressive. I don't think I've ever managed that before. Raya coming in clutch with a 10-pointer, a couple of fantastic saves in there for him, and obviously snatched a bonus or 2 as well. In defence, Trent, Porro and Robinson all returned again. Robinson snatched a late bonus point on the Sunday as well. So delighted with that back 3. And then in the middle, Smith Rowe got the goal and got the bonus points as well. The bonus points for any goal scorers, especially in midfield and up front this season, look like they're going to be massive. So I'm trying to prioritise that from now on. Smith Rowe didn't really do a lot outside of that one shot that resulted in a goal, and yet he came away with maximum bonus points in a 2-1 win. So I think that goes to show that midfielders or goal scorers generally in the forward areas, if they score, the bonus point system is really going to help them out on the bonus points. So love that. Nkunku is going to be an issue. We're obviously going to talk about that later on in the show, but don't worry, I'm not forgetting that. I'm not putting that to one side. I did think he was going to start. He obviously didn't start, which was a surprise to me, but now we've got that information. I think he's too much of a risk going forward, and he is probably a sell for me and most teams as well. So we'll have to talk about replacements later on in the show. Bruno Fernandes, very frustrating, but yet another game where he was close to a return. In fact, would have got the assist if that Garnacho goal, which didn't stand obviously, went in the back of the net before Xerxes got that final touch on it. So that's 2 game weeks in a row now where I feel pretty hard done by that Bruno didn't get anything. But how much of that is a pattern that I need to maybe take into account moving forward? Is he just going to be one of those players that is close to getting points and is just deceiving me week on week? So that is one to consider. Saka, not exactly what Palmer did or Son did, but again, churning along pretty nicely, got the assist, looked very involved even against Aston Villa, who are obviously a good side. And then up front, we've already spoken about Haaland, absolutely phenomenal from him. Great man of the match performance. Then Isak looked a little flat, 5 shots on goal, but I think only 1 on target. And Bournemouth did subdue Newcastle quite a lot, so it'll be interesting to see whether Newcastle come back swinging in Game Week 3 or whether this could be a bit of a trend forming. And then finally, Adam Armstrong, very disappointed, got the yellow card, got I think 1 shot on goal with a 0.05 XG, and basically did nothing all game, was isolated really far out wide on the right-hand side, and got hooked early for Cameron Archer, who was always going to play more centrally. in the late stages of the game. So that is a concern, but he is on penalties and usually his minutes are pretty good. So maybe not an immediate sell right now. On the bench, I do have issues. So obviously Valdemarsen's a non-starting keeper. Minte played and got good minutes, so hopefully I can rely on him in the coming game weeks. But then Hall and Barco. Barco's obviously off sunning himself in Seville right now, and Hall was benched for Newcastle. So those are two major issues, but they're not currently bothering my starting lineup. So it's whether or not I can wait and push it down another week, push the transfer away from me one more week, and hopefully have a bit more information to use those transfers next week on those players. Before we move on, do let me know in the comments below what you scored for Game Week 2, whether or not you beat me, and if you've got any key questions after the performances that Game Week 2 showed up. Do let me know in the comments below. So moving on to some of the key issues facing all of our teams ahead of Game Week 3. And this is obviously at time of recording Wednesday evening. So some of the Carabao Cup matches are ongoing, although so far it doesn't look like there are too many key players involved in those matches and not any major injuries to speak of from that just yet. So focusing on the key issues that we're currently aware of, Christopher Nkunku probably has to come out top of the list because he's the new surprise, or depending on how you want to put context into this, the surprise admission from Game Week 2. Now, I think most of us would have expected him to start after he got hooked off early in Europe on Thursday night prior to Game Week 2. Now, unfortunately, he was on the bench. He only got 7 minutes off the bench at the end of the game, and pretty much every single one of their attacking players performed well in their individual respective roles. So the different positions that Nkunku can play in, each of those positions was covered off very nicely by the Chelsea player in that position in Game Week 2. So I would think it's pretty unlikely that he comes straight back in Game Week 3, independent of how bullish Maresca was on him ahead of the season starting. I think now it is just an issue in our sides, and even if he does get a start in Game Week 3, we're going to be worried all over again come Game Week 4 whether or not he's going to come back out of the side, especially now that Jackson looks locked in up front. Cole Palmer played excellently in the 10 role, one of Nkunku's favoured positions, and on the left-hand side, Mudryk didn't play well, but his replacement Neto came on and did play well, so that's already even more of a concern that Nkunku wasn't the first call off the bench to replace Mudryk when he's not performing well. And then, of course, we don't need to even talk about Madueke. Scored a hat-trick. He is almost certainly going to keep his place. So this is difficult to predict away that Nkunku gets regular starts or 70, 80 minutes a game. And therefore, unfortunately for me, he is probably a sell. I will move on to one or two of my favourite replacements in just a moment's time, but if you wanted extended thoughts on some of the key transfer tips, I did produce a video earlier this week, so go and check that out where I talk about some of the key options to replace Nkunku in that. Moving down the list, Jarell Quansah had another game where owners will be very frustrated. He came off obviously at halftime in Game Week 1, didn't play in Game Week 2 with Konate putting in a pretty sturdy performance. He was very reliable, very solid at the back, and his passing range was also pretty decent as well, which was maybe prior to the season a little bit of a concern. Not so much anymore, and I would be surprised if Quansah won his place back anytime soon. Unfortunately for me, Quansah is now definitely a sell, knowing that he isn't going to come immediately back into the team. Moving down, Jacob Murphy, although starting the match would be a key issue for me moving forwards, because he got brought off early when Newcastle was struggling, and their replacement, Barnes, switched to the left-hand flank, and Gordon played at right wing. Now, barring any sort of injuries in the Carabao Cup or training, I would think, based on how well that went and how well Barnes performed, that that might be the way that Eddie Howe sets up in Game Week 3 against Tottenham. Now, obviously, there's no way of knowing that for sure right now, but Jacob Murphy's position was always questionable going into the season, and it was only ever going to take one off performance or average performance or Barnes coming off the bench and playing well for that to be in jeopardy. And I think, unfortunately, now his place is now officially in a bit of jeopardy. Moving down again, Dominic Solanke, very unfortunate, although we were relatively lucky in owners' cases that Ange was open enough to tell us before the game week started that he was going to miss game week 2. Obviously, still very unfortunate, but we haven't heard anything just yet as to his fitness ahead of game week 3. And Ange did actually mention that they have the upcoming international break to help him get back up to fitness as a bit of a backup. So I would say it's a pretty major doubt. And looking at the fixtures ahead of him, Newcastle and Arsenal back to back, do we even really want or need Dominic Solanke, especially if he's coming back from an injury? I would say personally for me, he's another player that I'd be almost certain to sell if I had him this week, especially with some of the cheaper options with good fixtures this week and beyond in the forward line. Now, moving down to number 5, Lewis Hall, I've already discussed him. I think of the issues, he's probably the least troubling. The only reason that I say that is because at least he does have a chance to come back in, and in most scenarios that I've seen, he's usually on the bench for most managers for most teams, and he's certainly on my bench this game week. Now, there could be a world, he started in the Carabao Cup today, and there could be a world where he does win his place back because he is highly rated. He is a young footballer. He will make mistakes as he did against Southampton. And maybe with a couple of weeks of training, Eddie Howe his faith is restored in him and he's happy to play him once more. I do still see him as a key issue this week, though, so I don't think I'd be able to start him, especially not against Spurs. And if there's another game week this week where, okay, he's sat on my bench, but let's say he also sits on Eddie Howe's bench, then going into game week 4, he's going to be a major risk and probably a more crucial transfer out. For now, though, unless you're starting him this game week and relying on him, he's maybe not a transfer you absolutely need to make. And perhaps you can just wait for more information after the international break and hope, fingers crossed, that he starts against Spurs, which at least would be a good sign for his minutes moving forward. Let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with my points, but also, are there any other key issues that you'd like to discuss that I haven't been able to put into this section? Okay, so moving on to the hot prospects, there are plenty of players within this that I could have included, but for time, for brevity, I'm going to leave it to a top 5 that have really caught my eye. Number 1 is no surprise whatsoever. Cole Palmer, absolutely electric in game week 2. And whilst Madueke scored the hat-trick, it was Palmer's performance that really stood out to me. The underlying data was fantastic, and it was the sheer fact that he was so central to absolutely everything Chelsea were doing that was good against Wolves. Yes, Wolves were very open, and I wouldn't expect Chelsea to be able to create that many chances, or at least exploit the exact same weakness every single time against a team any more this season. But if anyone's going to find a key to unlock a defence, it does look like Cole Palmer's going to be that guy once more. The goal he scored was absolutely immense, absolutely oozing with quality. And the 3 assists, he was clever enough to know that that was a serious weakness in Wolves' back 4. And he kept picking out Madueke on the right-hand side. And obviously, Madueke duly finished. Moving forwards, though, Chelsea's fixtures are very, very good. And Cole Palmer currently looks like one of the strongest options around his price point. For me, it's just a matter of whether or not there's space for him in my side and whether or not the player who's currently taking up that price point, in my case, Bukayo Saka, has been poor enough that I'm willing to use a pretty precious transfer at this point to move him out for Cole Palmer when, all things considered, they've scored pretty evenly to each other across the first 2 game weeks. And yes, Cole Palmer's been very explosive, but Saka got a goal and an assist in game week 1 and an assist in game week 2. So at the very least, he's been consistent. And the points totals are very similar anyway. So is it worth a transfer now? And as we know, transfers are very precious. There's a high bar as to what a transfer should be used on in early game weeks when there are so many injuries, so many little question marks as to rotation. Would I be willing to sell a player who's on 90 minutes, on penalties, on some set pieces, and with great data in Bukayo Saka, for another player with obviously equally good data in Cole Palmer and hoping that the upside's there? I think it's a luxury transfer. If I had no other issues, I'd be tempted to make it. But for now, I think I'm going to find a very big sofa and hide behind it every time Cole Palmer plays. I wish I had him in, but unfortunately there just isn't enough space to have all of these quality players in this season. So props again to FPL for making it difficult to fit them all in due to the pricing. Now, one player that could enable some of these higher priced assets alongside him is João Pedro. 5.5 million, played very, very well for Brighton against Man United, although it is worth noting, until he moved into that number 9 role, wasn't really accumulating very much XG at all. What he was doing was being a real leader on the pitch. He was absolutely everywhere, all over the pitch, and he was playing a very free role that Hertzler seems to quite like him in. Technically, it's a 10 role just in behind the striker, but if you look at his heat map, his positioning, it is all over the place, and he finds himself in pockets of space on the wings all the time. And also, like I mentioned previously, that final 10 minutes, he was shifted to up top, where he did generate a very good high XG chance towards the end. He looks like a clutch player for Brighton this season. He'll probably be on penalties, and it looks like, despite the fact they've got a lot of attacking talent, he's the one that Hertzler trusts to stay on the pitch and come in clutch for them towards the end of a game. So at 5.5, I think he's one of the best budget strikers, if not the best budget striker available to us. And it does free up a lot of money if you want to downgrade from a more premium option to fit in some more premium midfielders with that extra money. Now, moving down, Andy Robertson's another player that's really caught the eye. Liverpool, I think it's twofold for me. Not only are the fullbacks still generating XGI per 90, still generating chances, but Liverpool are playing with much more control than we're used to seeing them under Klopp. There seems to be a real emphasis on building up from the back, not necessarily playing a slow or transitional style of play, but being much more well-tempered, I suppose I'd call it, in the way that they build their attacks and not overcommitting too quickly, leaving themselves exposed at the back and building up with much more care and attention to structure moving forwards and as they progress up the pitch. So that means, and as we've seen in the first 2 game weeks, Liverpool's XGC per 90, that's the expected goals conceded, is looking like it's going to be a lot lower, which means they should keep quite a few more clean sheets this season if that trend continues. Now, why that's exceptionally good for the likes of Andrew Robertson and for Trent Alexander-Arnold is because these players are still getting really good underlying attacking data, which we always have seen from them, but now they're also adding the slightly better chance of clean sheets. And at 6 million, Andy Robertson in particular could be one of the bargains of the season if he keeps getting 90 minutes, which so far is looking really promising. He's getting good minutes. And not only is he creating chances, but he's also cutting inside and almost, again, if you look at the heat maps, he's almost getting in that number 8 role in and around the box, and he will get goal scoring chances from that. Arne Slot at Feyenoord was able to create goal scoring chances for his fullbacks very regularly, and although it used to be the right back in particular, it looks like he's playing Trent a little bit wider, and Andy Robertson's the one that's going to be cutting inside and finding himself in that midfield to striking overload when they are going forwards. And that could bode really, really well for a player priced very reasonably at 6 million in what should be a pretty good defence as well. Now, Emile Smith-Rowe and Morgan Rogers are the 2 midfielders that have most caught my eye at a budget price point in the early weeks. Now, obviously, Smith-Rowe came in clutch with a goal, but his minutes are improving week on week. His fitness and his ability to read the Fulham system is increasing every single week. And I think we're yet to see the best out of him, especially with a couple of good fixtures left before Fulham's fixtures turn. I still think he's a really good buy this week. Morgan Rogers is the budget-friendly option that we're all discussing this week. 5 million, although 5.1 million, I think probably by the time that this is seen by any of you. And although the underlying attacking data isn't excellent, I do want to talk a little bit more about him in detail and why so many people are really adamant that he is going to be a good option moving forward. So let's cut across to a more detailed view on Morgan Rogers now. So here we are, and what I've included here is his underlying attacking data as well as the expected points over the next 5 provided by Fantasy Football Hub, the fixtures, and importantly, that heat map so we can see the positions he's popping up in the early game weeks. Now, the first thing that's really important to note here is that Villa have actually had a pretty rough start in terms of fixtures. West Ham followed by Arsenal, not the easiest patch of fixtures, and this is the point where pre-season we were eyeing up Villa's fixtures as a proper turning point where we were probably going to start investing in the Villa assets. So that's advantage number one to Morgan Rogers right now. The fixtures over the next 4 and perhaps even the next 5, including United, very, very positive. Leicester, Everton and Wolves both looked really poor in the opening 2 game weeks. And then Ipswich, 2 promoted clubs away from home, 2 home fixtures against opposition who have gotten off to really rough starts. So overall, it bodes really well for Villa. And I am excited as to what they can produce in the next 4 game weeks. On to Morgan Rogers more specifically. Now, the underlying data so far hasn't been exactly eye-watering. It's not been brilliant. It's only 0.22 XGI per 90, which actually reflects pretty well on what he was getting last season. I think it was 0.28 last season in the limited games that he got towards the end of the season. However, I think with the eye test, the signs are really positive with Rogers. Even in the Arsenal game, he was brave enough to take on the likes of Partey, Declan Rice, Ødegaard, win duels against them, and also progress the ball up the pitch regularly. And the average position heat map, as you can see here, even against Arsenal, was still very advanced, and he was still popping up in positions in and around the box, right up next to Ollie Watkins until Watkins went off. He was also, I would say, pretty unfortunate not to find himself with an assist off of that Ollie Watkins chance that he blazed wide of the left-hand side post. Now, in another game week, that's an assist and that's a goal. And we're all talking about Morgan Rogers, probably being bought by a lot more managers, and his ownership skyrockets to 20-30% because he's the budget mid of choice. I think even without that assist, he's done enough for me that I still think he's a very good budget pick. He's only 0.5 or 0.6 more expensive than the cheapest possible midfielder. So this is very much your 7th or 8th attacker, and you don't need to start a player like that every single week. You play them in the opportune fixtures. Luckily, he's got 4 of them coming right up right now, so he is playable in all of those, and his minutes look so secure at the moment. He's getting 90 minutes week in, week out, and he's been their best performer on the pitch so far as well. I'd be absolutely stunned if he didn't start against Leicester and Everton at the very least. Wolves might be a little bit more problematic because it comes after the Champions League fixture, Villa's first Champions League fixture, might I add, and they'll obviously go full strength there. But Morgan Rogers has been shown so much faith by Emery already that I would not be surprised whatsoever if he started all of the next 4 games, even with Champions League taken into account as well. So for me, yes, the data so far hasn't really maybe painted the full picture of why I think Morgan Rogers is a good pick, but I think the fixtures that are coming beget form, and I think that he is going to be a very important player for me. And yes, that is a hint as to where my transfer has gone ahead of Game Week 3. So let's move on to the Game Week 3 Captaincy Matrix. As always, I've taken the 4 or 5 best picks in my personal opinion, not everyone's opinion of course, but the 4 or 5 that I like the look of, had a look at their data, had a look at the fixtures, and also generated the expected points from Fantasy Football Hub to see what the algorithms think as well for a bit more colour. Now, I think the top option this week is going to be Erling Haaland. Personally, despite the fact West Ham look improved and they look like they could be a defence to almost back this season at times, I still don't think that they'll have enough to take on City and keep them at bay. And I think the way that City are playing early doors this season, they'll have Foden back in the 11, you would think. They've got KDB looking very sharp too, so very good chance creators in there. And even away from home, I still think City will generate easily enough chances for Haaland to come away with a goal or 2 there. Now, obviously, 4 goals already this season. He's leading in terms of the goals, and the expected points also mirror this, 7.3 from Fantasy Football Hub. Now, that's not very far in the lead, and I think that's why we need to talk about the other 3 in context as well, because not all managers own Erling Haaland, and even if you do, if you own the likes of Salah, Saka or Palmer as well, there is definitely a conversation to be had this week. All 3 of those could offer a decent alternative to Haaland, even if you did have the City striker. Now, Salah comes out with 7.0 expected points in the Game Week 3 fixture away at Man United. Now, he has an incredible track record against Man United, so that's got to be spoken about. But I don't personally put too much weight to past years and past performances against clubs where those teams have been under different managers over the years, have had a very different starting 11, and might be setting up in a completely different way. I think the only thing that really matters here is that Salah has been around for a long time, and it's not like Liverpool have completely reshaped the way they play this year under Arne Slot. So Salah is still very much the same attacking threat as he always has been against Man United, and he seemed to have a fair bit of joy against them in the past. So it's more of a testament to how good he is rather than Man United's deficiencies. And I think that he is a very viable captaincy option in Game Week 3, especially if you don't have Erling Haaland. I think Salah is the standout pick, and I'd be very comfortable betting against Haaland with Salah this week, even if I had both and you wanted to go maybe slightly more differential, because I think Haaland will be the favoured captaincy option, but Salah is not far behind him at all. And in any given game week, these are so tight that any single one of them could absolutely explode and have a mega week. So do not put that past Salah. Equally, don't put it past the likes of Saka or Palmer, who both have decent home fixtures. I think Saka comes out lowest on the expected points, but that home fixture against Brighton is not bad by any means. And Brighton's left back at the moment isn't exactly well versed in the Premier League just yet anyway. So I think Saka could have a pretty decent time of it up against Brighton's left flank. And cutting inside, he looks absolutely electric early season already. Obviously already 3 attacking returns, so don't put it past him to have a great game against Brighton. Although for me, I would say that he's my least favoured captaincy option of these 4, mainly because the underlying attacking data isn't quite there for him yet, but also historically it doesn't quite match up to any of the other 3 last season either. So he is absolutely fantastic. I would back him for a return, but is he going to absolutely explode? I think it's less likely in Saka's case than it is in the other 3. And I'd always target the players with the highest upside on captaincy. Now, finally, Palmer, we know that he's got an explosive haul in him. Obviously, 17 points in Game Week 2, including 1 goal and 3 assists. That puts him joint top of these 4 attacking returns already. The underlying data is improving, and last season's data was absolutely phenomenal. And that Palace fixture doesn't look half bad at the moment. Palace have gotten off to a pretty rough start. They've lost Anderson, and Gahey is constantly under transfer speculation at the moment. So who knows what's going to happen there? Is that going to disrupt their back line? Quite possibly. And is Palmer going to be able to take advantage of that, coming off the back of a 6-goal thriller against, an 8-goal thriller against Wolves, in which Chelsea managed to create 6 goal-scoring opportunities? I think it's a decent bet as well. So I think if you've got Palmer, I would be absolutely happy to put the armband on him as well. Overall, I think on balance, it just marginally goes to Haaland. His goal threat is so high. The underlying data, not just this season, but over the past 2 seasons, is completely out of this world and better than any of the others. And I think the way that they've started the season and how fit and sharp Haaland looks, it would take a brave FPL manager to go against him if you had him. Although, that is definitely a strong argument to have a look at the other 3. And if you've got the other 3 and you want to go differential, don't let me put you off of it whatsoever. It is a close contest this week, so it might be an opportunity for you to chase that rank a little bit. Let me know in the comments below who your favoured captain is ahead of Game Week 3. And let's move on to my team selection and my transfer ahead of Game Week 3. Right then, so on to my team selection. And as I've hinted throughout the video, a transfer has already been made. I went relatively early on getting rid of Christopher Nkunku. Unfortunately, I did have to swallow 1 price drop. The reason I did that was at the time his price was going to drop, I wasn't completely sure on the move I wanted to make, so I preferred to take that extra 24 hours to really think through my move and make sure that I was comfortable bringing in the player that I wanted to, even though I knew that Nkunku was the player I wanted to get rid of. Now, I always prefer to have that style of play. That doesn't mean I'm always going to make a transfer early or late, but I do want to be very confident of the move I'm going to make before making it, and I'm willing to lose 0.1, even 0.2 at times, if it means that I make the right decision over a rushed decision. The decision I did make was Morgan Rogers coming in. Now, I think at 5 million at the time that I bought him, he is just phenomenal value for money considering the minutes he's getting and the fixtures upcoming for Aston Villa. Now, it is a gamble because I'm hoping his underlying attacking data improves pretty dramatically, but also I do have a strong 8 in attack, and if worse comes to worse and Morgan Rogers isn't getting that data, Smith Rowe and Minte are both absolutely playable in every game week before I wildcard. So that's game week 4 and game week 5 after this week. So I'm more than happy to play both of them instead of Rogers. And Armstrong, again, I'm pretty happy to play him most weeks if I have to, although hasn't looked fantastic yet, I will admit. So maybe that is a future transfer out pending too. Overall, I've started off the season pretty well, 606k at the moment. I'm very happy with the start. To be even within touching distance of the top million at the moment would be a decent start. So do not worry whatsoever if you're ranked 2 million. You're only going to be 10 or 15 points behind me. And that is just one big player haul away from being a pretty decent rank at this point in time. So don't be discouraged. The margins are so tight early on. So absolutely just keep playing, keep making those bets, and you'll get there eventually. I guarantee it. Now, moving on. I think overall, the structure of this side isn't ideal for Game Week 3, but I think it's very nice for the next 3 or 4 fixtures. And I'm not willing to just bring in players for this week only. So I'm not a kind of manager who wants to optimize every single week. I prefer the longer term greater good for my side rather than using all of my transfers every week to maximize this week ahead of me. Now, Raya is one good excuse for that. Now, I don't think Brighton is the best chance of a clean sheet, although looking at the data, it is one of the better chances across all of the 10 Premier League fixtures this weekend. And then in the back line, it's 3 away fixtures, but all 3 of those players have a decent chance of attacking returns, and at least there might be a decent chance of a clean sheet or 2, although I do think that this is the week that finally I might not get a return from 1 or 2 of my backline for the first time this season. Moving into midfield, obviously Morgan Rogers is in there as discussed, but I have kept hold of Bruno Fernandes despite the fixture against Liverpool, and that might be somewhat controversial, I guess, because I do have a free transfer to make, and there are other players at a cheaper price point that are performing very well. What I would say, though, is Fernandez's data is still very encouraging. After this game week's out the way, he's got 2 good fixtures against Southampton and Crystal Palace. And overall, you would expect it to even out over time with Bruno. Now, he is very frustrating to own. I don't plan on keeping him on a wild card once I get there. But I think I've kind of made peace with the fact that I'm willing to gamble on him eventually returning in the next couple of game weeks. And who knows, at home to Liverpool, it would be so Bruno if he was able to get a return when we were all least expecting it after blanking with really good chance creation statistics and shots on goal in the first 2 game weeks. So I'm not losing faith just yet, but he has been a frustration and I understand completely why anyone else might be getting rid of him. I'm just backing the data and I'm hoping that it serves me right in the next few game weeks rather than necessarily this one in particular. Now, Smith Rowe's an obvious hold, Ipswich away. Great fixtures to come, no problem there. And Saka, I don't think it's worth the transfer for Palmer just yet. Although, if I had no other issues in my side over the next few game weeks, I would be tempted to go there, considering Palmer is also on penalties, has better data and better fixtures over the next 3 game weeks. I would completely understand it if you had nothing else to do, if you wanted to make that move. And if I didn't have Barco and Hall sat on the bench looking like future transfers that I'm going to need to save that free transfer for, then I might be tempted to do it myself. As it happens though, I'm happy to hold on to him for now. Up front, the same front 3, it's Haaland with the armband as I discussed. Isak, I'm giving another week to against Tottenham. I think that Tottenham fixture will really suit Newcastle and Isak, and I expect it to be a very high goal scoring fixture at both ends. Doesn't bode well for Porro in my back line, of course. But I think Isak will come good, and the data from last season was so encouraging that I don't think he's turned into a bad FPL option in just a matter of 2 game weeks. So unless he gets injured in the Carabao Cup tonight, I'll leave something in the comments if that is the case. I imagine he'll be staying in my lineup, and I will be showing faith in him until I wildcard in game week 6. Same probably goes for Armstrong, to be honest. Very disappointing, but he is only 5.5. I'm hoping that I don't necessarily need to play him in the next 2 game weeks after this, but he is on penalties. I would normally expect him to get 80 plus minutes. I think game week 2 was a bit of an anomaly, but if that continues, then he will be on the chopping block for me very, very soon. Moving on to the bench, Minte is an obvious bench this week away at Arsenal. And then Hall and Barco are going to be issues in my side. It's just whether or not I need to transfer them out before I wildcard, or whether I can just hold on to them for a couple of game weeks, save those transfers, which obviously I can roll through a wildcard, and I can really attack out the back end, even if I've got a weaker bench over the next 2 game weeks without being able to rely on them. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think my team looks like for game week 3, whether or not you agree with my transfer, and obviously, let me know any comments below what your key issues are ahead of the deadline. I'd be happy to help you out if at all possible. And once again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you again if you're new around here and you have tuned into my channel for the first time. I really appreciate that. If you could leave a like on the video, that would be fantastic. Aiming for 100 likes, it would be fantastic if I could get there. And of course, if you haven't done so yet, please do consider subscribing as well. In the meantime, good luck in game week 3, and I'll see you on the other side of the international break as we start preparing for game week 4.